at defendingutah.org. We hope that you'll also like our Facebook page, and that's at, of course, facebook.com/defendingutah. And during the show, you can always make a comment, ask a question of a guest, and make sure that that you're being heard. And we have several ways to support Defending Utah. One is through donating at our website. Every $5 donation gets you an entry into our drawing for a free lifetime membership to Front Sight Weapons Training. And that's a $15,000 value. So if you go to the website, defendingutah.org, and you donate $20, that gets you 4 entries into that drawing. And so that's a great thing. Also, you can advertise your business, your service, or your product on our show. And every business that does that signs a 6-month contract at $5 an ad minimum and 1 ad per day for 6 months. We'll get that automatically. We'll get that lifetime membership to Front Sight Weapons Training. And that's, again, is a $15,000 value. So it's pretty much a no-brainer. You get a great deal, and you get to help out Defending Utah Radio. I want to bring up some things on that are on the news today. We don't just pick one website, but we just got one article I wanted to get into today, just as a tribute at KSL.com. Becky Lockhart was remembered as a tireless leader in Capitol Memorial Service. Salt Lake City, Becky Lockhart, the first woman to serve as Utah House Speaker, was honored Thursday as a role model, a wife and mother, and a caring colleague who loved lawmaking. Quote, "Utah is a better place because Becky Lockhart served here and contributed so much to all of us," Governor Gary Herbert said during a memorial service at the state capitol, where more than 1,000 people, including many state officials, gathered to remember her. So it was something that caught, I think, everybody by surprise, what happened to Becky, and we send our condolences and our sympathy to her family. We are very critical of a lot of politicians in Utah, but I think at this time it's important, especially with her and her family, that we just stick to just giving her condolences and wishing her family the best and prayers for them. Defending Utah is really focused on thinking right and wrong, not left and right. Sometimes because we're constitutionalists, which people see us as maybe being more conservative, we might focus on criticizing people that are considered to be on the right more often than not. And because it's kind of like it's easier to talk bad about, maybe not talk bad, but give constructive criticism to people that maybe are closer to your side of thinking. But it's making sure that we are thinking right and wrong, not right and left. And along those lines, we have our special guest, Linda Spencer. Thank you again for joining us. Maybe you want to step closer to.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
To the mic, and we have an article that kind of goes over the experience that you had in court. And we met a while back and you can check out this article as well about gun confiscation in Utah County, the case of Mark Berg.
Right.
And that's kind of how we got introduced to each other. And but what kind of led up? Let's kind of maybe just what led up to. Maybe that would be ahead of us. Why am I having Linda Spencer on? Who are you? Just some random person that shows up at courtrooms, But you're an advocate for victims of people that have been shot by police or maybe
any type of police brutality
of any kind. And you started a nonprofit.
Correct.
And tell us about that.
Well, the nonprofit is called Red Shirt Families, and that basically, the red shirts stand for the blood that has been spilled by the loved ones of Utah families only for now. We're looking at going national. Basically, it is to help them with things like funeral expenses, counseling services, all of these things that aren't available to victims of police brutality. When a policeman is killed, he has all resources, the family has all resources available to them. But when a police officer kills a victim, they have nothing.
You just now came on.
Well, okay, that's great that they have that resource for the victims that and that's not taking really I don't think taking sides one way or the other, but just recognizing that these people need help.
Right, recognizing that there's a need.
And taking care of that need.
Right.
Well, that's a good thing because we want to make sure that charity is the best way to do it. Government is kind of so far removed from people. If we can help each other out, I think that's a really much better way. Recognize if you're pro police all the time or if you're anti police all the time, this is definitely a need either way.
Right.
Of
Regardless of what people think of the victim or the person who was killed, there's still a family that's grieving. And I'll use Darian Hunt's family for an example. His mother is getting a bill every single month for his funeral. She's a single mom, and can you imagine grieving the loss of your son and still every month receiving a bill reminding you that you owe money for burying your child? And so what Red Shirt Families hopes to do is either offset those costs or eliminate them completely, depending on how well funded we become.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody wanted to donate to that, how would they?
We have several ways. The best way right now is to go to our Facebook page, Red Shirt Families. It's a nonprofit, and on that page there are links to donate by PayPal and Bitcoin. And we also have the name and address. It's America First Credit Union. And the account number, I don't have it memorized in my head. It's on the Facebook page. So
and if they go to which bank again? I'm sorry.
America First Credit Union,
and just
ask
mention
for Red
it.
Shirt Families, they should be able to look that account up. Any America First Credit Union branch.
And it's not like you're trying to take money out of it, so they should be able to just let you put money in it.
Right. They will let you donate, and correct. They won't even give you a slip that tells you the balance.
So okay.
But we do need help, so please donate. Great.
So let's get into the story. First Amendment banned from Utah courts. So, you had an experience at the courts regarding a case, and we think the First Amendment there was several cases, in the past year where the government has set up free speech zones.
Right.
I wasn't aware that the First Amendment only applied in certain zones.
Correct.
I missed that segment of the First Amendment where
you and I both.
It says you have the right to free speech as long as it's within these 30 square feet.
Right, in the confines of these ropes.
And so, but we recognize that the First Amendment applies everywhere. And there's of course you can't lie about someone. You can't say that somebody's murdered somebody. I mean, that's not First Amendment. That's
right.
You're damaging somebody's reputation. Right. But if you have a position, you want to support somebody or a candidate, or you want to say something bad about the government, like you don't like what they're doing, that's right. Something completely different. That's protected under
right.
the First Amendment. And so tell us what happened in the. And was this back last August?
August of 2014, correct. I had just gone to one of the hearings for Mark Burge, and we created a Facebook
Well, then maybe
page.
What we should do then, if it was, is give us some background about the case of Mark Burge and why you were there.
It was a very complicated case, but basically the reason I was there is because one of the things that had happened to Mark was he was pulled over. He had actually called the police because his work truck had hit a branch on a tree and done some damage.
So he had called them. He
Right.
wasn't trying to hide.
I think it was a neighbor that called that saw it happen or something. Uh-huh. And so he pulled over the side of the road, and the neighbor had called. And in the process of that, apparently they found out that he had some outstanding warrant. He was arrested and placed in handcuffs, and he had an injury to his back, to his spinal cord, for which he had an implant, like a stimulator that was supposed to help with pain. And he told the police officers, please cuff me in front, because if you try to pull my arms behind me, it's going to damage that. And they didn't believe him, so he said, okay, let me lift my shirt and show you. So they allowed him to do that, and he showed them where the stimulator was implanted. And they were basically like, big deal, we don't care. They pulled his arms behind his back anyway, and then they pushed him, forced him into the back seat of the police car, at which time it broke the stimulator. And he was taken to the emergency room, and on his way into the emergency room, he was feeling the pain and couldn't walk very well, so he was kind of dragging his leg, and the police officer got impatient with him and basically tackled him to the ground. So he was trying to alert anybody within the hospital, saying, you know, I'm being abused by this police officer, whatnot. So that's the story that I heard, and so my concern was protecting him against this type of abuse. And in investigating it further, we found out that this particular police officer wasn't new to this type of thing, so that made me look into it even further. So that's where our support came from Mark.
Great. Okay. And what was interesting, I thought, we did the article about it and how they took his gun from his home and didn't, even tell him what was going on. And it was like the charges were kind of after the fact, it seemed like, when the police were involved in gun confiscation. And a lot of people don't think that would ever happen here in Utah.
I had it happen to me. I'm not new to that. It surprises me when a weapon is not even mentioned or brandished or anything, that they can come into your home and ask if there is a weapon in the home. And if there is, they are allowed to take it. And they are allowed to keep it until the, quote, disposition of the case. In my case, I had it back in 30 days.
So that's lucky compared to some people, I think.
Right. Well, my case took 11 months for the first one, and then another 6 months for the appeal. But I had my gun back within 30 days. So you just have to fight.
I know some people, even a lawyer. This guy still hasn't been been several years, and he still never got his gun back. They told him they melted it down. Well,
this is true. I've heard these horror stories, and that was one of the things that, as soon as I found that out, I went right over to the police station and wreaked havoc on them. Because, one of the horror stories I heard was a person who wasn't even involved in the situation that was going on. They lived across the street, and because they stepped out their door, they basically saw what happened, and the police officer came to their home and confiscated his guns, and they were antiques. And when he got to the police station to finally get them, they had put them in buckets of water.
Oh, no.
Yeah, ruined them, destroyed them.
Oh.
Yep.
That's awful.
So that was the first thing I could think of as my brand
That's
new.
like vindictive. Why?
It is. I don't know why they do things. I have no clue. But that was the first thing I could think of happening to my gun, and I was like, they are not going to do that. I'm getting that back. It's my cute little pink Camel Walther P22 that was a gift to me. It was the first one I ever owned, so.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you got that back. Okay,
Yep.
So now you're at the court to kind of support Mark's case.
Right.
And tell us from there.
Well, there were a couple of us there. One of the things that we had done is made some badges just to show our support, and so Mark would see them when he came in. This particular day is basically what they call a law and motion calendar, and it's like a 3-ring circus. There's nothing formal about these courtrooms. They're pretty much crazy. So we walked in and sat on the front row, and we had it's a business card size badge that said Free Mark Burge. And we had been there over an hour. I actually had an attorney friend there with me too. He was sitting next to me on one side. And we had been there over an hour, and I noticed that the bailiff kept looking over at me, and I was like, okay, whatever, Pretty soon she gets up and walks over to me, and she said, you need to remove your badge. And I said, based on what law? And she said, the judge doesn't want you wearing it. And I said, based on what law? And she could not articulate a law. And I said, are you familiar with Cohen versus California? And she said, I'm a lawyer. And I said, well, then that would be a good case for you to know, because you need to know the laws that you're enforcing. And she kind of continued to stand there and argue with me. When the person next to me had the very same badge on, she said nothing to him. So I thought, well, at this point, I'm just going to take it off, but I pinned it to my purse on the bench. I didn't put it completely away. And because I wanted Mark to be able to see us and know that we were supporting him. But I'm trying to think of what happened at that point. She walked back and sat down, And then the attorney that was sitting next to me, he said, you might want to take this up with the judge when the court is over. And I said, oh, I will. And so he kind of briefed me a little bit on what to do and what to say. And
you said that you would file a civil rights claim?
well, that I mentioned to her later. Her name was Amber. But I noticed in the courtroom that several people were wearing badges, and I was like, okay, so this person has a badge on representing where he works. This person has a badge on representing that he is a student intern. The police officers have badges on.
So it wasn't the idea of having a badge wasn't the problem.
It was what the badge said. And so one of the things that she said to me is, well, this is a preemptive measure. And I was like, based on what? And so, I kind of go back to, again, the Cohen versus California situation where he was wearing a jacket that, according to some people, had an offensive statement on it. And he was actually convicted by a California law that, it was the crime of disturbing the peace. And he was convicted, and he appealed it, and the appeals court upheld it. And so he took it to the California State Supreme Court, and I think they either didn't want to hear it, they didn't do anything with it, so he took it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court did uphold that jacket was free speech. So the fact that I was wearing this badge that said Free Mark Burge, it floored me that it wasn't allowed. So anyway, I went around and I sat next to these people with these badges on, and I took pictures of them just so I had them for evidence if I needed them later. And when court was over, before everybody left, I said, "Excuse me," to the judge. I said, "Can I have a minute to ask you about something?" And he basically said, "Well, does this have to do with any of the defendants that were here today?" And I said, "Well, not really. It has to do with something that happened to me personally, and I'd like to address you." And he said, "Well, okay." And I said, "Can I approach the podium?" And he said, "Sure." So I went up to the podium, and I said, "When I came into the courtroom today, I was wearing this badge," and I held the badge up, and before I even finished it, he said, "Oh, no, you can't wear that in here." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Well, because if I allow you to wear that, then I have to allow other people to wear their badges that say things like so-and-so should be put to death," or, this kind of thing. And I said, "Okay." He said, "Besides that, it might influence the court." And I said, "Well, by the court, what do you mean? I can understand if there's a jury present, possibly." He said, "Well, me as the judge, I could be easily influenced by these types of things." Now that comment floored me. I was like, maybe if you can't be unbiased, you need to look for another job. But because, we all know in plenty of courtrooms, people come in with T-shirts on. In the Sean Cowley hearing, they had a whole section with their blue shirts on that said Team Cowley on the back, and this was in a preliminary hearing.
So he admitted that the facts weren't the only thing that he was going to base
apparently
his decision on.
And that was kind of an eye-opener to me. So in the process of
and like you said, though, and there's other cases where it was in support of, like, police officers.
Right.
Was it the same judge that allowed it?
No, different court, 3rd District Court, different judge.
So I wonder if the judge would be the same. Would it be unbiased, or would he allow those shirts and not your badge?
Well, and so what I said to him is, I said, I noticed that there were several other people here in the courtroom today wearing badges. And he says, "Oh, they were? Well, they shouldn't have been." And he goes, "Well, wait, what kind of badges?" And I said, "Well, this man is wearing his badge for his work." And he actually came up and spoke on behalf of one of the defendants here. And obviously you gave him some deference for his badge that he had on, because he held some sort of position that he was able to have credibility as to this person's character. Mm-hmm. So I said, "Why is it okay for him?" And he was like, "Well," I said, when I said something about my constitutional right to free speech, he basically said, "The First Amendment doesn't apply in this courtroom."
He said that.
Yes, he out and out said that. I wish I had it recorded. I'm sure we could get it if we grammar requested that day. But I was just
so the judge said that the First Amendment doesn't apply.
The First Amendment doesn't apply in this courtroom. Wow. And I was just like, if it doesn't apply in the courtroom, where does it apply? Isn't that the first place you would think it applied? But he basically told me in no uncertain terms that it was his courtroom and he made the rules. And
So he acted like it was his house as opposed to a government public building,
Right.
there to protect the liberty of
Right.
everyone.
Right. And he told me, one of his comments was, there's not a judge around that would allow you to wear that badge in a courtroom. And I said, well, that's interesting that you should say that, because we've already worn these badges in a couple of other courtrooms, one of them being right there in that 4th District Courthouse, but just a different judge, and nothing was ever said. We've worn them several times in the 4th District Court in American Fork for some of his appearances, and nothing was ever said.
So what judge was this?
This was Judge Sam McVeigh.
Judge Sam McVeigh said that the First Amendment doesn't apply in his courtroom.
That's right. So when I asked him about Cohen versus California, he said, well, now you're getting into legal things that I'm not prepared to discuss. And I said, well, it's a rather large case, and as a judge, I would think that you would be well aware of this one. And I said...
Isn't that the place where you discuss legal things?
Right. Case law. So he basically... I said, well, it's been upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court since 1971. And he said... The U.S. Supreme Court cases don't have any place in this courtroom.
What?
So again, I'm like,
what is that based on, I wonder?
I know. So, I mean,
Weird.
I'm just floored because I went through 4 years of paralegal school and I had judges.
So the
for
Constitution
professors.
and legal precedents doesn't apply to his...
Right.
So does he think it's his living room?
Well, that's kind of how it felt to me. He definitely was the king of his hill there. I watched him totally rip on some of the defendants that were there to the point that I almost wanted to cry for them. I felt really bad because of the way he was talking to them. And yeah, one of them did mouth off a little bit. But when you're in that kind of a situation, it does get kind of frustrating when you feel that powerless and you're basically being talked down to.
That's the only thing you have left to do is just...
Right. And so in voicing his opinion, this Judge McVeigh basically said, just for that, I'm going to double your sentence. And I'm like, wow, really? They can do that? They have that much power? Aren't there guidelines, you know? So yeah, it was an interesting experience that day. But he basically told me, he became very condescending. And he said, you need to learn your rights and you need to go talk to a lawyer and have a lawyer speak for you the next time you're here. Yes. And again, I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, first of all, he has no clue who I am. And second of all, since when does anyone need a lawyer to represent them in court? Anyone can represent themselves, you know? So I was just like, wow.
Was he going to charge you with practicing law without a license or something?
You know, it almost felt like that. And so I just kind of smiled and I just looked at him and I said, oh, I'm very well aware of my rights. Thank you. Have a good day. And as I was walking off, the bailiff just rolled her eyes at me and went, you know. And I walked over to her and I said, you can roll your eyes all you want at me, but I'm not finished with you yet. And she goes, are you threatening me? She yelled really loud, are you threatening me? And boy, the other sheriffs with her had her guns. And I said, no, basically what I'm telling you is that I will be filing a notice of claim and you will be named as a defendant. So, you know, and I did. I filed a notice of claim about 3 months later for violations of my civil rights and a violation of due process. Because in the courthouses, when you walk around in them, you see signs in various places that say, for example, no cell phones allowed. Do not talk to the inmates or communicate with them in any way. There's all of these different types of things that you're warned about. There is nothing that says you can't wear a badge to support anyone or have any particular wording on a shirt or anything like that.
Well, even if they did, it'd be totally invalid.
Well, it should be, because it is a violation of your constitutional rights, and that's why Cohen versus California was upheld. Now, Cohen was in the corridor of the courthouse, but I don't understand why that door into the courtroom precludes constitutional rights. You know, you leave your constitutional rights at that door when you walk into the courtroom. It makes no sense.
A sign, a badge, is not like you're standing up and
Yelling and
shouting, trying to shout down the proceedings. You're just wearing something that people can choose to look at you or look away from you.
Exactly.
And that doesn't affect the proceedings.
Exactly. No, very quiet and peaceful. Nothing disorderly about it.
So if you had kept wearing it, do you think they would have arrested you for disorderly conduct?
Absolutely. And at that point, I had just gotten off my probation. But, you know, I was looking for more trouble to get into anyway. But, yeah, I didn't want to take that chance. well, you know, I fight for rights, and if that's construed as a troublemaker, then I'll wear it proudly. The thing that bothers me is that when you know your rights and assert your rights, the people who are in this authority, and I hate that word, over you, don't like it. They want you to submit to them. They want you to kowtow to them. And when you don't, your rights are violated on a regular basis. A friend of mine in Texas that does a Rule of Law radio, he said, asserting your rights, knowing your rights and asserting them is becoming the new crime. And I've experienced that myself, so I totally agree with that.
One of our listeners, Greg Lesher, commented on Facebook, and which reminds me, if anybody is listening and can get on Facebook at Defending Utah, please feel free to comment or ask a question. But he made a comment. He said, you should have said to the judge that I must be in a foreign jurisdiction, and if so, are you carrying a green card?
You know, hindsight's always 20/20. There were several things I thought of, but there were also things while I was there that were going through my head that I'm like, oh, I better not say that because I could create some major trouble here. And after watching the way he reprimanded that prior defendant, I was like, I'm going to be careful here. I'm going to take this up outside the courtroom, like I said, which I did by filing this notice of claim, and I named the judge as a defendant also, but you know, I submitted it in October. I've heard nothing. So,
is there a way? How does that work? If you were to, do you wait? Do you have to wait, or do you follow up and say, "Hey, what's going on?"
You know, you can follow up if you want to. I was just doing this mostly to put them on notice and say that I know what I'm doing, and
you're not going to take it,
right? And that the next time I wear that badge in the courtroom, you better leave me alone. So, but I mean, there's a penalty for violating oath of office that apparently is about $250,000, and so I included that language in the notice of claim, etc. But if I wanted to pursue a lawsuit on this, I could. So, but just picking my battles right now. This is just a preliminary. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's important to, when we talk about constitutional rights, that we understand that our rights are inalienable, God-given, as the Founding Fathers said, that the Constitution's there to protect them.
Right.
They didn't grant them to you.
The Constitution didn't grant our rights. The government does not grant our rights.
Right.
And this is what bothers me about the thinking of so many people. I mean, if you ask them, where do our rights come from? They're like, oh, from the government. And I just want to facepalm. If they had the right to give us these rights, then they also have the right to take them away.
Right.
And they do not have the right to take them away. And that is why I am so adamant when I have any type of encounter. And, I don't know why it happens. I don't know if I go looking for it, if it just is attracted to me. But I do have several encounters with police officers. And some of them have been good. But the vast majority of them don't go so well because I feel like they don't understand the Constitution. I feel like they don't have an understanding of people's civil rights. And they are trained a certain way, and they violate those rights. A lot of them don't even know the law. I've had to correct them on laws. For example, writing a ticket to someone for double parking when they weren't double parked at all. They were parked on the opposite side of the road. And the police officer said, well, if it was in a cul-de-sac, well, if they aren't this many feet away, then it's double parking. And I said, no, that's not double parking at all. Go back and read your code,
Right.
So, but, my kids know, and I actually have gotten phone calls from my daughter at 2 a.m. because of where she works. She's out that late, and she'll call me and say things like, Mom, this police officer just pulled this person over and they're making him do the field sobriety test. You've got to come down. So I'll come down and start filming and, always film the police. We both have dash cams in our cars now just because of things that have happened to us.
Well, you mentioned, when we talk about the Constitution, and I don't know if you heard yesterday's show with Bo Babka.
I did listen to some of it.
We asked him the question if he had ever seen a federal agent or a report sent to Utah law enforcement that demonized constitutionalists. And without hesitation, he flat out said yes.
Yeah.
And so, that's probably what causes your trouble, is you're talking about the Constitution.
Right. Don't mention that word.
and too bad they actually swore to uphold it. So
right. Not only the U.S. Constitution, but their state constitutions. And the Utah state constitution is very similar in wording.
Right. In a lot of areas. Oh, and which gets us into, we're talking about different things, and you've had a lot of experience with officers and different things. Jim Tracy, the sheriff of Utah County, has in several occasions talked about reconsidering checkpoints, and I know he's gone to several public meetings where he's said that he was going to stop doing them, but it seems like he's continued to do them even after saying that he was going to stop.
I was actually in one of those meetings, and I was sitting right up front, and he said that he was a constitutional sheriff, and he said when he talked about the checkpoints, he said, we're gonna stop doing those because they are unconstitutional. And then a few sentences later, he said, well, what we've kind of talked about is making them voluntary. And I just started laughing. I was like, I threw my hands up in the air and I said, a voluntary unconstitutional checkpoint. Why use the money and the manpower? What is the point of that?
So is there like a voluntary free speech zone? And there's
it's
lots of different areas where we can voluntarily give up our liberties, right?
That's right.
Let me take a break real quick. Let everybody know, remind everybody that this is Defending Utah Radio. I'm Ben McClintock with my special guest, Linda Spencer. She's an advocate for victims of police violence, and she did we had an article of hers, an experience she had on defendingutah.org about the Utah judge that said that the Constitution and Supreme Court rulings don't apply in his courtroom. Wanted to let everybody know that if you're in the market for a home or to sell a home, please contact Bob Womack at Osmond Real Estate, 801-372-7094. Again, that's Bob Womack at 801-372-7094. And also, if you are looking for to upgrade your employment, American Appliance is looking for an HVAC technician. And if you've got 2 years experience in working and diagnosing and repairing HVAC systems or appliances, and you're looking for consistent weekly work and a fun work environment and healthcare options, this is the position that you should look at. It pays $18 to $25 an hour depending on experience, and you should contact American Appliance at AmericanApplianceHVAC.com, or you can give them a call at 801-254-2566, 801-254-2566, and make sure and remind them and tell them that Defending Utah Radio is where you heard about the position. So we were talking about checkpoints, law enforcement. We had Bo Babka on yesterday, who has experience with law enforcement, and I've appreciated a lot of his comments, and he's not afraid to really call out law enforcement, which is a good thing, because I recognize, this might be looked down upon on some, but I've been a part of a group called Support Your Local Police, and I don't mean support your local police in their brutality and their boot thuggishness, but support them from being overtaken by federal authorities. Support them from becoming paramilitary. Support them in returning them back to what they were, like what we think of with Mayberry.
Peace officers rather than law enforcement.
Not looking to increase revenue for the city, but actually, instead of spending the resources in going after innocent people that are just minding their own business, basically, but just happen to maybe not pay their license fees, or they're just minding their own business, basically, and go back to maybe spending those resources on investigating human trafficking that is going on in Utah, things that are actually harmful. And so
things that actually have victims.
Right. And so in those things, that's where I support the police. And I'm not anti-police. I'm not in favor of having no police. And so we don't want to mix
accountability, pro-transparency, and do the job that you're hired to do.
Right.
Not the one that raises revenue. I don't know if anybody's ever had a car stolen in Utah, but basically they'll come and fill out a report and say, good luck, because they can't spend their time and their resources looking for your car when they could be out doing things that will make them money.
Right. We can't look for your car because we're looking for speeders.
Right. Yeah, I actually turned in a cop that was speeding. That was an interesting little situation. And basically what it boils down to...
And that would be something that would help. Sheriff Tracy said he wanted to find ways to heal the relationship between the police department, the sheriff's department, and the community.
Mhm.
And those are the things we're talking about are the things that could really go a long ways in healing that relationship.
Well, I found that Sheriff Tracy talks a good game, but in action, I haven't seen it. I actually spent an hour and a half with him just in a private meeting over the situation that happened to me and telling him how his officers treated me because I was injured. And they just seemed, so concerned and, give us all this information and we'll look into it and, this should never have happened. And within a matter of time, I get back pretty much a form letter because it had the wrong date on it. Mm-hmm. And it said, we've thoroughly investigated this situation and found that your allegations they have no basis. And it's just like, are you kidding me? So you really do wonder. And in that,
if you make an allegation, you'd think they'd want to charge you for filing a false report.
Yeah, if it wasn't true.
Right, if it's not true.
Right. Well, except that I had proof of the injuries, so I don't know how they could find it where I found it. So, But, he stood in that very same meeting and he just put on this quizzical face and he goes, what is this paramilitary training that I keep hearing about? I'm just not even familiar with this paramilitary training. And I just wanted to yell out, you liar! Go online to YouTube and look up what your sheriffs did in Spanish Fork at the rave. They came with helicopters and camouflage and combat everything, and they were horrible to the people that were there, even though this place had gotten the proper permits. So I'm like, don't tell me you don't know what paramilitary is because you were the sheriff when that went down. So, yeah, he talks a good game, but action is a whole nother word.
So what happened when he said that he was going to get rid of the illegal...
The unconstitutional checkpoints?
Checkpoints, yeah.
I don't know of any that the Utah County Sheriff's Department has done. They're supposed to be published in the paper. I have seen some that have been done by local police departments. I'm very much an advocate of going and holding a sign to warn people so they can turn around. And
that's been ruled constitutional free speech.
Absolutely. Yes, as a matter of fact, the first one I did was... it was one that they were doing in American Fork and Highland. And I stood up at the top of the hill in Cedar Hills with my sign, and I got a lot of thumbs up, but I also got a lot of people that just went right through because they have the attitude, well, if you don't have anything to hide and you're not breaking the law. And I'm like, but that's not the point. It's a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. And so people will say, well, don't you want drunk drivers off the road? And I say, absolutely, I want drunk drivers off the road, but not at the peril of everyone's Fourth Amendment rights. Do what you used to do. Follow them around. If they're exhibiting erratic behavior, pull them over. That's them doing it, not
Don't just assume everybody's drunk.
Right. Well, and we found that those checkpoints aren't necessarily about getting the drunk drivers off the road. They're generating a lot of revenue from other things like, you've got a crack in your windshield, or you've got a broken taillight. They issue a lot of fix-it tickets. But anyway, I was standing at the top of the hill, and the next thing I know, this unmarked SUV comes up the hill and circles around and pulls up behind me, and I can see that the person driving it has the vest on that they were wearing down at the checkpoints, and I'm like, oh no. And of course I know that I'm within my rights, but let's see what happens, because I was there all by myself. So he got out of his vehicle and he came up to me and he goes, how you doing tonight? And I said, I'm doing great, thanks. And he said, just had somebody come through the checkpoint that told us you were up here. And of course I'm thinking, tattletale,
yeah, really.
Narc on your neighbor. It just bothers me, that whole see something, say something. It just bothers me to the point.
Because you're a terrorist.
Yes, because I'm a terrorist. Because I believe in the Constitution. But he basically said, well, just wanted to make sure that you're safe and that you're not standing out in the road or anything. And I said, nope, I'm well off the road, thank you. And he said, okay, have a nice night. And I said, you do the same. And he took off. So I continued.
There's nothing you could do, obviously.
Right. So I continued to hold my sign, and at one point I had to go through the checkpoint because I had to go to Walmart to get a marker. Because as it got dark,
So you had to go through the checkpoint?
I had to go through the checkpoint. And so...
Did they recognize you?
No, there were so many officers. They must have had 20 officers just standing. And the way they did this one was the road. The entire road. Anybody who came down that road had to go through the checkpoint both directions. It was going up American Fork Canyon and coming out of American Fork Canyon.
So is drunk driving a proportionally bigger problem than people beating their wives or, kidnapping or drugs.
I don't have the stats on that, but
violence, things that harm other people.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not that drunk driving doesn't, but I mean,
right,
proportionally.
Right, yeah. I don't have the stats on that. And like I said, I'm all about getting drunks off the road, just not in this way. But I've never had a problem in a checkpoint because I know my rights and I assert them and I don't get scared. So when I pull up and they're like, I crack my window just a little bit and they're like, how are you this evening? And I just say, am I being detained or am I free to go? I don't say fine. I don't say anything. And they're like, well, we just want to know if you've had anything to drink tonight. And I say, am I being detained or am I free to go?
I've heard that a lot, so that actually works.
Oh, yeah, it does work because basically if they say you're being detained, they have to articulate a crime that you've committed or a law that you've broken. And if they can't, then they legally have to let you go. So you just keep repeating, am I being detained or am I free to go? And so he finally said, well, go on your way. So I went on my way, did my thing. I had to come back through the checkpoint to get back up the hill, so I experienced the same thing, same reaction. These guys were actually... So if you go through, then you've got to make sure that your headlights work and your taillights work and you don't have any cracked windshields, right? Pretty much, but they still had no probable cause. They still have no probable cause for you coming through that checkpoint. Right. You were forced into it. So their probable cause, they really can't cite you for those things because they had no probable cause. But they do, and if you go to the court, I doubt they're going to... And therein lies another issue. Is that even though you're innocent, you can be found guilty. Right. So you do have to know how to fight it if you go to court. But I did one in American Fork not that long ago, and what I love is that in this particular one, I was standing out in front of an IHOP, and a lot of people were coming in and out, and of course they were looking at the sign, and sometimes you get flack for it, but the vast majority of the people were like, aren't those checkpoints unconstitutional? Aren't they a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights? And we're like, yes, you guys know. So that was pretty cool, but I ended up going through that one too, and in this one they had taken up an entire parking lot. They had over 30 police cars all backed in a row to show their power. They had the big paddy wagon, this huge van that could hold probably 30 people. It's like, really? Are they anticipating that many? And there was no traffic on that road. Thailand is really known for their drunks. I know. Well, this was in American Fork. Oh, American Fork, same thing. Yeah, this one was in American Fork. But, so yeah, I did the same thing. Some friends of mine showed up later and they said, hey, why don't you come on down through the checkpoint and we'll be videoing it when you get here. And I was like, okay. We thought they were just pulling random people like every third car off the road, but they had everybody routed into this parking lot, and then they had 5 slots that you had to, and they'd direct you into one of the slots that was open. Wow. So I pulled into one of the slots and I rolled down my window, and I was really annoyed because I thought I was just going to get to drive through. And the officer said, have you been drinking tonight? And I said, am I being detained or am I free to go? And I saw him look up like at a supervisor or something that was standing behind him in the car. And he goes, well, we just want to know if you've had anything to drink. And I said, am I being detained or am I free to go? And he looked up at his supervisor again and he goes, you can go on your way. So, just know your rights and assert them, or you don't have any. And it seems like Utah has probably come across this situation a lot, because I've heard from a lot of people that have tried that works. But then you see videos of people trying that in other areas, right, and the cop calls it mumbo jumbo. Well, a couple of those that I've watched, they started to talk. They said too much, and it's like, don't engage them. Don't talk to them. You can, if they're asking you if you're having a good night, you don't say, yeah, I'm having a great night. How's yours going? You just say, am I being detained or am I free to go? And you just keep repeating that. Because if they can't articulate a crime, they cannot keep you. But, there are situations where people have been told to move over into another section, and they've called dogs to search their cars, and, just all of these types of things. And all of that is wrong. So let's get into why is that wrong? Were the Founding Fathers trying to protect terrorists? No. And drunk drivers? No. So, what's wrong with the phrase, if you're not doing anything wrong, you've got nothing to hide? What's wrong with that? The problem with that phrase now is that because, and this is just my opinion, but I've also heard this from a lot of other people, it's not just about whether or not you're breaking a law. It's what can we find, what can we manufacture that will generate some revenue for our department. And
I've been through driver, those when you get like a fix-it ticket or like a speeding ticket or something,
right.
You go through the class, right? And they spend like all day long learning all the different traffic laws. And I had a teacher actually tell me that you are always breaking the law. It's just is the officer going to find something to pull you over for.
Well, and that's correct too. And I'm going to defer to Ayn Rand here. Basically, one of her quotes is that the only way a government can control its people is if they are criminals. So when there aren't enough criminals, what they do is they create so many laws that you cannot possibly live without breaking a law. There's also a book written called 3 Felonies a Day. And with all the laws that are on the books, we are all guilty of committing crimes all day, every day.
The average person commits 3 felonies a day.
Well, that's what the book title is. I don't know that they're all felonies, but...
I'm sure, well, there was an John Dougal, who is the state auditor. He posted on his Facebook page an article, a news report about a case going to the Supreme Court where this guy was arrested for having drug paraphernalia. And guess what that drug paraphernalia was?
A rolling paper.
Socks.
Socks? You can have an apple. An apple can be construed as drug paraphernalia because people can smoke pot in an apple.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And so when you have, like you said, when everything's illegal,
right?
If the cop wants to get you, you're wearing socks.
Right.
That's drug paraphernalia.
Right.
Come with me.
Exactly. And that is why you don't want to even give them the opportunity. And that's my whole thinking along, if you're not guilty of anything, then why don't you just...
Because you are guilty.
Well, you basically are. They will find a way to make you guilty. I've seen it happen. I've seen people that thought they were going into a situation completely and totally innocent. I was arrested for not doing anything. I know it can happen. And I was arrested in my own home for not doing anything.
Well, I've had lawyers tell me that the more innocent you are, the more you should shut up.
My philosophy is keep your mouth shut, period.
No matter what.
They no longer have to Mirandize you. Miranda's an interesting thing. So
there was that case that said that exercise your Miranda rights, which is basically your Fourth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights.
Your own Fifth
you have
Amendment.
to
right.
You have to verbally
invoke
them.
your own, and that ticks them off too. Because basically, what happened to me was I said I have nothing to say to you without a lawyer present, and they kept questioning me, and I kept saying I have nothing to say to you without a lawyer present. And every time they asked me another question, you could tell they were getting more and more agitated and more angry that I wasn't going to answer them. So their way to deal with that was to put me in handcuffs and haul me out to the police car and take me to jail. So I had to spend all that time in court defending
myself. So you were
myself.
Detained and not free to go.
I didn't ever ask them that, but basically what I told them is, get out of my house. You have no right being here. Nobody from this house called you. You're trespassing. And they refused to leave. So go figure.
That's interesting. So with that,
it's a whole other story.
So with these cases that are going on, Utah, people might think that that we don't really have a bad situation in Utah. We don't have a lot of police brutality, or we don't have the police really abusing their authority. Most of the time, people have good experiences with the police. What do you think? Maybe the ratio is? Is there something that sets it off? Like what do you think? If majority of people aren't really, because if the majority of people that encounter the police were being abused, it wouldn't really last. So what do you think kind of triggers these situations?
I don't know if there's a trigger. I don't know if there's a ratio. Basically, what I would say is these people who are saying there isn't this problem just haven't experienced it yet. And once they do, they start looking into it, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's rampant, So until it happens to them, they're not interested. Especially if you've just gone along in life being this quote-unquote law-abiding citizen, and bam, out of nowhere, you're in jail for something you didn't do. That's a huge eye-opener, and it does happen.
Yeah.
It happens on a regular basis, and I always just say it's not if, it's when. As far as triggers, do you mean as far as like the officer, how he reacts to you or arresting you? Or
Right. Well, is it somebody like, yes, they're breaking a law, but normally it's minor, and something happens where it just escalates, like with Darian Hunt, if somebody hadn't called the cops, which whoever called the cops on him for holding the
and I will
sword.
say his name right here and now. His name was Stephen Spencer, no relation, and I am disgusted by him because he is a huge Second Amendment gun rights advocate, and he should know that Utah is an open carry state.
So
I have my ways. He is bragging on his Facebook page that he called the police and that this happened, and that he feels like he did something good because he feels he prevented somebody from possibly being injured, because Darian could have used that knife or that samurai sword to kill innocent people.
So just to say, I've never seen that. Don't sue Defending Utah Radio for slander or libel or whatever the written or the spoken form is.
I've got screenshots of it. No, I've already reprimanded him.
So he's proud of what he did. So
yep.
That's interesting. What do you think led to the escalation of that? Was it just because it seems like maybe Darian? I don't know him, but just from the news reports, which I know doesn't give you the whole picture, but that's what I have.
Yeah.
It appeared maybe he had a learning disability and didn't understand what was going on, and maybe he was just kind of showing off.
I don't think that's the case, and I don't even want to speculate. Based on what I know about him, because I am in touch with the family on a regular basis, and I have heard both sides of the story. They do have a lawsuit going on, so I don't want to speak out of turn at this point. I have my theories. I think they're pretty spot on, so we'll see when it all comes out.
That's one thing I don't personally agree with the family on, is that they're claiming that it's race-based. And it seems like with the amount of incidents with police killings, only one of them have been with a black person.
Well, it hasn't been just one. In Utah, our black population is 1.3%. So I am not going to deny that we do have some racism issues here. I am not going to deny that there are cops who are racist. Whether or not that played was a factor in Darian Hunt's killing, I don't know, but knowing what I do know about Showerhammer's background, I would not put it past him. I will say that much. There have been, I want to say Alan Nielsen was a black man who was killed in Utah. Before we started this, we were talking about the Salt Lake Tribune has created a database based on some of the information, that they were seeing happen with our groups and such. And they've gone back to the year 2005, and there are 90, well, including the 3 that we just had since the first of this year, 90 people in the state of Utah who have been killed by police officers. And when I went looking through that database, I do remember seeing that there were a couple of other black people who had been killed. So Darian is not the first one. But it seems like it's maybe proportionate with the population. It doesn't seem like it's an over. For them, I think it was. For them, I think it was an in-the-moment comment because of the issues they have had in Saratoga Springs with the harassment and so on, because they are a biracial family. So, I can't speak to that because I don't know what they've been through. Just basically the things that I've heard. And, it could or couldn't be. But like I said, knowing what I know about Showerhammer and his background and previous things that are fact, I would not put it past him. These cases, it seems like they're triggered by, and we all break the law. Like we've mentioned before, we're all law breakers. And so... so much for law-abiding citizens. Right. And so I guess maybe it's the level of law breaking, or the law breaking that we're engaged in, and then the response to the officer that calls us on it. Because why isn't it happening with every time somebody gets pulled over, or somebody, gets their car towed by the police? They don't encounter a circumstance, right, that's more violent than others. I think there is so much that plays into it. I think there's a lot of psychology that plays into it. I think, for everything to come together and become this perfect storm, there are a lot of factors involved. I have my theories about the types of people that become police officers. I have my theories about how the culture in Utah plays into it, how authority plays into it, how they treat women who don't submit to authority. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that play into it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I had an interesting situation with Officer Jason Richmond, and he's a UPD officer in Riverton, and I'm a lawbreaker at the time. I had not paid my registration, and so he pulled me over and told me to empty out my car because he was going to tow it away.
Oh my gosh!
And so he stole my car and told me to empty it out, and so I had my I had my handgun in the car. And so he told me to empty it out, and so I did. I took it out, and it was unloaded, and it was the chamber was open, so you could tell that there was no way anything could happen. I put it on the ground, walked away, and had my hands out, and so it was obvious that I wasn't holding anything, I wasn't in danger, and I was probably a good 3-4 yards away from the weapon. And the officer tells me to put my hands up and draws his gun on me. I'm not holding anything. I'm walking away from the gun, and tells me I'm lucky, and I'll edit him for radio, but he says I'm lucky for not he says you're lucky I don't blow your effing head off.
Wow.
And so
I hear those comments a lot on any type of recorded police officer interaction.
Right.
I think it's part of their training. They and this is already going before the legislature, and this is a huge issue, but we are working on de-escalation training. There are just too many situations that are benign that turn into deaths, and it just doesn't need to happen. I was in fear that mine would. When they knocked on my bedroom door, I had a silver phone in my hand, and my first thought was, I need to get rid of this phone so that when that door opens, they don't think I'm holding a weapon and kill me.
Right.
So, it happens on a regular basis.
That's interesting. Well, Linda, I think our time is up. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Our listeners, thank you for joining us this evening. And please join us every Monday through Friday, 5 to 7 on 540 AM, or online at defendingutah.org. We have a special guest tomorrow and a really special guest on Monday. Oak Norton will be speaking about Common Core. And we'll have a representative of Latter-day Conservative on tomorrow night. And so thank you for joining us, and please tell your friends to listen in to Defending Utah Radio every Monday through Friday, 5 to 7.
Why do we sit down when all should be standing? And why do we back down at the critical moment, like a running away from the waves of the ocean? We head for the hills with the high tide approaching, as sand slips away from the castle. When it's time to stand upright, why do we falter, like placing our freedom on the sacrificial altar? We hold tight to our fears and defend our oppressors, as we fight for their lives and become the transgressors, as pacifists transform to violent aggressors. But I'm only a stranger here, I'm alone